I'm Mr. Julius Juma Ogega, keeper, Western Region, in the Directorate of Antiquities, Sites and Monuments, National Museums of Kenya. The lesson is about World War I, which was fought between July 1914 and November 1918. The objective of the lesson are events leading to World War I, the strategies employed, and the impact of World War I in Africa and Europe. The main actors were Central and Allied powers, and the Central powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. The Allied powers were British, France, Japan, and later USA. The situation in Africa then was that this was the period of the scramble for Africa, and most of the African countries were under the European countries or European nation. During this period, East Africa was divided into two European powers. German East Africa was Tanganyika, which today is Tanzania, and British East Africa was Kenya, which is still Kenya. But there was also Uganda, which was part of this war. During this campaign, the war started in August 1914 in German East Africa, between German East Africa and British East Africa. That's along now today Kenya-Tanzania border. The Germans in Africa also wanted to connect their territories in East, Central Africa and West Africa, and also the Southern Africa. They wanted also to create an empire. Remember, the Belgians were in Democratic Republic of Congo. During that time, they used to call it Belgium Congo. So that's why they had to start a war, so that they can connect their territory in Cameroon and also in Benin, and another territory in Southwest Africa, that is in Namibia. The other reason was the German wanted to keep busy the British in Africa so that they can win in Europe. The other thing, the German attacked Kenya, that was then British East Africa, so that they can take control of Uganda Railway, which was very important in terms of getting raw material from the hinterland and also supplying the troops from Indian Ocean to the hinterland of Africa. In 1914, German attacked Belgium in Lake Tanganyika. They also started the war in September in Taveta. They attacked the British in Taveta and also in Lake Victoria. During that time, there were no standing army in the British East Africa. So what the governor then did was to order for reinforcement from India. Later, there were reinforcements which came from South Africa, which were mainly the Boers or the Dutch. There were reinforcements which came from Rhodesia, which is currently Zambia and Zimbabwe. Another reinforcement came from Nyasaland, which is currently Malawi. There were also reinforcements from Nigeria. Remember, Germans also started a war in West Africa between the British, who were in Nigeria, and they were also the Germans were in Benin. So when they were defeated in West Africa and also Southwest Africa, that is Namibia, then the British ordered the troops there to come to East Africa to help them defeat the Germans in German East Africa, which is Tanzania. But the funny thing is that the Germans never asked for any reinforcement. In fact, the ratio was 10-1. That is, for every 10 British soldiers, there were only one German soldier. There was a time where the number of German soldiers in East Africa were around 20,000, but the combined force of the British forces in East Africa then was over 200,000. These 200,000 British soldiers was supported by African, some who are forcefully conscripted. They were taken by force to come and serve in this war. They came as far as from Uganda, Western Kenya, Central Kenya, Somali, and along the coast. These people, they formed the Carrier Corps. These were porters who used to carry the war supplies for the British soldiers. In fact, these people, whenever they were conscripted, they were taken directly to Voi, where they used to carry the war supplies in 3 relays. We are told that one British soldier was served by 15 African men, the Carrier Corps. This Carrier Corps used to work in 3 relays. The first take the goods from Voi to Mwatate. Then they give another set of men, African men, from Mwatate to Bura. Then the last will take the goods from Bura to Maktau. Around towards the end of 1914, Maktau was a big British military garrison. There were over 20,000 British soldiers in Maktau. In fact, the name Maktau comes from the British word mark time. So it was a big British garrison, and this is where the British soldiers were stationed. Remember, these European forces in East Africa didn't have a standing army. They were relying on forceful conscription, but by that time, the British had established King's African Rifle, which was composed mostly of Nubians from Sudan. Then the Carrier Corps was a conscripted unit by forceful recruitment. It was mostly composed of Africans from Western Kenya, from Rift Valley, Central Kenya, Cumberland, and also along the coast. The Carrier Corps, their main work was to carry the war supplies for the KAR. Also, the British settlers also formed a unit which also served in the war. Among the German, they had a protection force called the Swarstrup and the Askaris. The Askaris were like a unit of the Carrier Corps, but they were on the German side. They also had porters, but it is also said that the Germans treated the Askaris better than the British. In fact, that's why the ratio I told you was 10-1. You can even ask yourself why 10 people cannot defeat 1 man. Number 1, the Carrier Corps were never given any good training. Also, the British racially discriminated the Africans. The other thing which also worked against the British, remember I told you, the reinforcement came from different parts of the world, India, South Africa, Nigeria. So if you are a soldier which came from Nigeria, you will be only commanded by maybe your superior from Nigeria. So there was a disunity among this reinforcement up to around 1914, where there was a general which came from South Africa, Jan Smuts. In fact, Jan Smunt is the only general in history which served in 2 wars. He served in First World War and won, and also in the Second World War. So up to the time the reinforcement came from South Africa, the Germans were overrunning the British, even here in Kenya. Remember, the first shot was fired on 14th September in 1914 in Taveta, which was then the border between Tanganyika or German East Africa and the British East Africa. But by towards the end of 1914, the Germans had overrun the British up to Mactau, which is over 60 kilometers from the border. So that tells you that the Germans were winning up to the time the reinforcement came from South Africa under Jan Smunt. The war was devastating in East Africa. It had a very huge impact on the Africans and also on the European. Number one, on the career corps, over 120,000 of them died in this campaign. The British lost around 20,000 soldiers in this war. By 20,000 we mean even the reinforcement which came from Nigeria, India, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi also died. Remember, Portuguese, the Germans also attacked Portuguese in Mozambique, so there were also some casualties from the Portuguese side and also casualty on the Belgium side, remember, from the Belgium Congo, which is now DRC. There was also famine, which killed over 400,000 Africans. That is combined. This famine was occasioned by several things. Number one, this large British force had to be fed, and these people used to raid the African farms and even cut away the livestock to go and feed the soldiers. The other impact was the rise of the white settlers in Kenya. Now they ganged up because they also formed a fighting unit in this war. So when they came back, in fact, as a form of compensation, they were given huge tract of land in places like Trans Nzoia, was in Gizu, and also central Kenya. Because the British didn't have money to compensate these soldiers, so they were given land as a form of compensation. On the Africans which served in this war, when they came back, there was a rise of African nationalism. And so that's why in 1922, you remember about the riots in Kenya and people like Harry Tuku. So these were some of this impact of the war. Others was the territorial change. The war ended in Europe in 1918 through the Treaty of Versailles. And in this Treaty of Versailles, the Germans were told that you are going to lose all your territories in Africa. So some of these territories were given to Belgium, like in Rwanda and Burundi. Others were given to French, like Cameroon. Others were given to the British, like the Tanganyika now became under control of the British. The other reason is the able-bodied men were taken away to go and fight in this war. And in history we know that the brother of Jomo Kenyatta, the eldest brother, went through this war and never came back. So several Africans died, they were killed. Then there were also the diseases, then like influenza. There was general population decrease in almost every part of East Africa because of famine and also war. Remember, I also told you that the Germans in East Africa, they said that they were never defeated. They only met their adversaries and shook hands. They were never defeated. The Germans were using guerrilla tactics, so they were like hitting and running. In fact, then they were pushed from Taveta. The battle went towards central Tanzania. Then the British chased them down south up to Mozambique. Then from Mozambique, they also fought using guerrilla tactics, northern Mozambique, then to Malawi and Zambia. So where the war ended on 25th November was in Zambia, not even in Tanganyika then. And it took time because lack of communication during those time. So it took like 2 weeks before the Germans could realize that already they had been defeated in Europe. Once again, I'm Julius Juma Ogega, Keeper Western Region. This has been my lesson on World War I. Thank you.